No, it's not.
Hi
Hello.
guys.
Hello.
Instagram. Can we
Yeah.
crash this horrible tool?
Yeah,
It's
it's a
wasting
bit
so much of my
complex.
time. Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. We hear you
Okay.
completely.
I already hate the whole thing, so let's move
Yes.
on.
Great, great. Thank you. Thanks for joining this live session. After ages, yes, we made
Oh
it.
God. But I don't
Uh,
know how I got in here, so it's fine.
it's okay. It's okay. I sent you the request.
Okay.
Hopefully you accepted it. Thank you. You are our first guest on this live session.
Okay.
You don't need any introduction to our followers. You are a lecturer, a principal of Zaha Hadid Architect. Your articles are famous on architectural magazines, and everybody knows you, I think. And I will just go directly into my questions. For start,
Sure.
do you have
No problem.
anything? Do you have anything to say to our followers as a start?
Um well, hi guys. Sorry about the cock up.
It's
I'm,
okay.
I'm I'm behind the curve. I'm still into Twitter and Facebook.
Great.
Um, so yeah, let's go on. I mean, I've been learning about Zoom and we're using that. I'm using Skype for Business. I'm using
Yes.
GoToMeeting. I'm using everything, but so far I haven't used Instagram. So
Yeah.
yeah, please. Sorry guys for the wait. And let's have a conversation.
Great.
So these little comments and icons, should we ignore them or should we respond to them?
I will turn off the comments, not to be a source of distraction. So I will ask my questions from you. Then,
Yeah,
if we have time, we will get the questions from comments as well. Okay?
all right, great. No problem at
Okay,
all.
great. So, would you please tell our followers who is Patrik and what makes Patrik Schumacher Patrik Schumacher?
Wow. Yeah, well, I mean, I'm a unique individual. I mean, there's nobody like that. Well, everybody
Oh,
could say that, and I leave others to try to define it. But if I wanted to define it, I would say I have this kind of combination, which I also admire a number of other figures,
right.
and what I'm aspiring to is that a combination of being a design talent and somebody who is designing and somebody who's also doing business work. I mean, organizing business and building a business. But most importantly, I'm an ideas person. So I'm somebody who is thinking hard about the development of the discipline, the meaning of architecture and design and the built environment for societal progress. So I'm a theorist of architecture, embedding architectural theory in an overall theory of the human project, if you like, or certain, and developing an attitude and a position, and that combination, which shows up, of course, in the writings, and these writings and the thinking is guiding to some extent practice. I mean, of course, practice is also dealing with a lot of other forces which push and
Right.
pull and prevent and etc. etc. But as much as I can, I'm trying to have a purposeful and meaningful theory-led design practice. And an important component of this is also teaching to build up for the future the answers, the repertoires, the exploration that will deliver a stream of possible solutions into the practice, into the real world pursuits. And then again, through lecturing, discussing the results, I can also reflect on the results and test the theoretical assumptions, predictions, and so on. So that's the unique combination: theory, practice, business. I
That's
mean, theory,
impressive.
design, practice, business. Yeah.
That's impressive. Would you please discuss a little bit about your journey of becoming an architect, then joining to Zaha Hadid Architects?
Well, yes. I grew up in a small town, and my parents had a house which they kind of self-built, and then there was an extension. The architect came around, so that was my first contact with architecture, with construction design. And then, as a teenager, I got into the work of Mies van der Rohe. I was somebody who was in love with modernism, particularly
Modernism.
elegant and radical otherworldly modernism of somebody like Mies van der Rohe, and I enjoyed that. But then growing up a little further, I was initially more ambitious than just kind of homing in directly on a particular profession. I wanted to understand the world, and I went into philosophy first. So I wanted to crack up that pretense which is hanging out there, that there are so-called philosophers who have a deeper intellectual penetration of the big questions of the world, of what the human project might be, etc. So I had to get in there first, get an overview and orientation, and then move on from there back into practical life. So I didn't want to stay purely academic, bookish creature. I wanted to do stuff in the world, but informed by a fundamental orientation, let's say. And that's the way I got into architecture a little later, so after my philosophy studies. And quite quickly, first when I actually, my first foray into architecture was in Stuttgart, and I got quickly into high-tech architecture, which was big en vogue there in the mid-'80s. So Foster, Rogers, these works, I studied them and did a number of such projects at school. And then I transferred to London. I learned something else. I learned to be more in how architecture could be critically discussed, also on the terms of philosophy. I got into deconstructivism, and the deconstructivism show, which was announced which was at MoMA in '88, and there's a conference in Tate, Britain. Now Tate Britain, at the time that was the only Tate gallery in London, where I met Zaha actually. And I had just studied 1 year of architecture in the South Bank University in London here, and then I moved, applied for Zaha, and the studio was a very small studio, but I had seen her work already in Stuttgart, and she was
which year was this?
1988. So Zaha had just started 2 years earlier, a small office, a handful of people. Before that, she'd worked from home or from the AA. She was still in contact with the AA, and I was hanging around at the AA as well. So I joined that studio, and we were just a very, very small group with big ambitions, let's say.
Exactly. So how has your interest emerged with parametric and computational design?
Well, I mean, quite early on, even in Stuttgart, I was a student there. They had just invested in a suite of Apple computers. This is 83, 84. And we actually got a bit into programming. At the time, there wasn't the kind of fancy graphic user interface. It was all kind of these text-based interfaces and no proper CAD systems, which we had, but little programming routines, etc. And then when I came to London, there was already some interesting computing going on. This was at the South Bank University. Programs you might have never heard about, like Swivel. And then I got into the early mini Apple with the graphic user interface and 3D modeling tool like Model Shop. Very, very simple and primitive, but fun to play with, fun to work with. So I got into this quite early. But even in my philosophy studies, I got into computer science somewhat. So I got very fascinated early on with computation, computer science. This was very attractive to me. And so I got into this. Maybe when I joined Zaha, we really had, first of all, zero computing power. So we went back to hand drawing and sketching, and I had invested my teenage years in exercising my sketching talents. So I could fit in there as well. So we created a lot of the early fluid and let's say highly distorted and dynamic compositions, all through hand sketches and French curves, etc. And but 2 years in, we started to get these little Mac computers and started to combine hand sketching with computational modeling. Only a few years later, actually, we got into proper CAD systems, pioneering this as well, where we suddenly, instead of 10 people drawing up a competition with breaking their backs and trying to put dense sets of inclines, highly precise across large canvases, I mean, that was killing us. So, so I, as a single person, I could do all the plans quicker than 10 people could kind of bend over huge drawings. So that was an enormous productivity shift as well. So that got us into the power of computation, but it really took, and also an intellectual breakthrough. The early part of parametricism was, the early first phase of parametricism was called folding. And it was not only that we used new tools, but that new ideas came through, or what we were doing with Zaha, this degree of dynamism, fluidity, the idea of gradients, of surfaces peeling and folding, that could be much better expanded with these tools, and that became a new direction in architecture, initially called folding in architecture, and then later, in retrospect, I started to call this parametricism, particularly when we got into generative components, when we finally arrived at parametric modeling with tools like Grasshopper. We are very deep into parametricism already, but it took a year. It took 15 years to get there.
Yeah, actually, I would like to ask about that word as well. Like, you coined out the word parametricism in 2008, and
Yeah.
how was parametricism was born?
Well, I mean, it was actually.
And what are its principles, actually?
Well, of course, I will tell about the principles.
Actually, I don't want you to fit the whole article of like 100 pages in 5 minutes, just as general.
Well, I give you two. I give you the principles first. I mean, every element of architecture becomes parametrically variable. That's just, if you even start toying around, you can make it then dependent on external parameters, whether they are environmental, like sun exposure, etc., to drive, for instance, fenestration or the geometry of shading elements, etc. But so we have, first of all, the elements parametrically variable, then we're thinking of systems of elements or arrays and fields and swarms of elements. So, and so the variations are ordered. So it's all about rule-based. It's about scripts generating. So not about inventing forms here and there, but and then you have multiple systems. That's a very important aspect of parametricism. Not only that continuous variation of elements and aspects and forms, but also that multiple systems come in and are correlated. So you get these dependency networks you can set up between something like, for instance, the structural system, the envelope, the fenestration, occupiable surfaces, the spatial divisions. So what I'm thinking about is each of these systems is parametrically set up through rules, and then there are rules of correlation, so that these different systems, their variation and changes and change functions are interdependent, oftentimes in non-trivial ways. So that gives you a really very, very beautifully orchestrated, complex, organic whole. And then you could do that also with the whole city. You can script an array of buildings across the topography, and there will be dependency relations of the, for instance, slope versus building height or building orientation versus sun direction, etc. So that's basically all what the tools deliver. I mean, Grasshopper and these kind of parametric system tools, that also becomes a new set to exploit. That is eminently rational and beautiful and adaptive and meaningful, but it's also, that becomes the principles and values of parametricism.
Exactly. And what about tectonism? Tectonism is also a birthchild of parametricism. And,
of course, I mean, that's this is never standing still, so that's the next developmental stage, if you like. Currently, and we're already 10 years into that, and then a few years back I've retrospectively tried to define that. It's a much more matured attitude. So here we go, and we also generate more tectonic variety, more formal variety, because we're driving not only the systems formally, just let them differentiate, and we're not only using NURB surfaces, for instance, or component arrays to differentiate, but what we're looking at is engineering logics more precisely. So it's less playful, more rigorous, and so in terms of, for instance, structural logics and different fabrication logic, different material logics, and their variations are coming in and are consciously selected and orchestrated as well. So structural logics, environmental engineering logics, as well as fabrication logic. So if you work with different types of, instead of using always NURB surface, sometimes you use use curved foldings or conic surfaces when it becomes work with sheet metal, or you work with catenary systems when you use hanging structures, or you have anticlastic tensile structures, or compression only vaulting, synclastic vaults, etc. And they all have their particular characteristics. And so you have already a beautiful range of types of surfaces, and they all have they're all equally characterful, but unique and different. But they also have that degree of freedom which all of these systems have, that they can always fit themselves into complex sites, onto irregular footprints, and always find a kind of balanced and optimized configuration, because we're not inventing these forms, we're allowing the systems to evolve these forms. And the great hero which we owe this to as an early pioneer is Fry Otto.
Yes.
And it was great. I was a student of Fry Otto in Stuttgart in the 80s. And at the time, I wasn't quite able to fully appreciate. I was more into Foster and Rogers. What a fool I was! I had the diamond right in front of me, and I wouldn't. I somehow intuitively attracted to him, and he went to the institute, and it was kind of curious and interesting, but I didn't quite get it at the time.
Yeah.
So later I went back to study his works properly.
Yeah. Actually, in 2015, he got the Pritzker Prize as well, and it's good to mention his name as well, Fry Otto. Thank you for mentioning.
Well, for Otto, I mean, actually, you know who was responsible for him getting it? It was Zaha.
Wow, impressive. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks,
because
sir.
She was in the jury, and we both kind of shared that love for Fry Otto, and I've been talking about him all the time. So it was great. And he passed away in the same year, but he received the beautiful message at the end of his life. Yeah.
Exactly. So since passing of Dame Zaha Hadid in 2016, what were the challenges you faced to lead the top of the industry, Zaha Hadid architects?
Well, yeah, I mean, to stay on top, as I tell you, it's tough. It's kind of stressful.
Exactly.
Sometimes I want to kind of say, "Oh God, leave it behind." But no, I mean, I had to step up, of course, and I was quite. I mean, we were well built as an organization. And internally, of course, I've been with Zaha for so many years. I was suspected there was no leadership challenge, no infighting, none of that. Just pure solidarity and pulling together. Half of the staff anyway, ex-students of ours, of mine, or me and Zaha teaching. So that was no problem. Also, other architects, I've been respected. They understood who I was for many, many years. I'm friends with all the other greats and bads and goods of the field.
Right.
So, but you know, the big challenge was, would I be credible in front of mass media? I wasn't so exposed to that. I was hiding behind Zaha.
Yeah.
And she took the heat, and I was going, you know, more in the kind of academic realm and not so much in the mass media realm. So I wasn't sure if that would fly and how much this would fly. And I did got some kind of beaten up here and there as well. So it wasn't an easy run. And also I wasn't sure with clients, you know, how would clients keep coming? Would the firm, without the great charismatic leader and figurehead and charmer Zaha Hadid, would we still get jobs? And first of all the jobs we had, even if we had the smallest just started, they kept trust with us and let us continue with the jobs we had. But also we got a lot of new jobs, and we got invited to major projects, and thankfully also cultural projects. We were invited, we were competing, we won a handful of those as well since. So I'm very grateful, and that wasn't clear. That wasn't to be taken for granted, that we could keep playing on that elevated level where you need not only a good business organization and talent, but you also need some form of intellectual and cultural leadership to be trusted with complex public problems, buildings, also on the field of urbanism and so on. So that that came through, and now we actually expanded our reach, for instance, in the direction of airports and infrastructure projects. But we continue to do museums, and we just won, for instance, Shenzhen Science Museum. We won the Yekaterinburg Concert Hall. That's very important to me as well as make, we just got planning permission for a new big twin tower project in London. So it's also a breakthrough in terms of new, let's say, types of work which we can take on.
Exactly. So could you talk to us about the main objectives keeping the highly recognized practice like Zaha Hadid architects on top of the industry until this day?
Well, I mean, the key is that we also kind of new talents coming up from below, if you like. I mean, there's some shooting stars, or I mean, serious characters like Bjarke Engels or Thomas Heatherwick. So, and we need to stay on top by remaining innovative. So every new project we have to carefully consider what's appropriate, what's right, but also what would be a chance for innovation. And to do that, we keep using or working with students. 60 of our people, and we have 400 people, 60 of them are actually teaching around the world in different places, a lot of them in London, like the AA in particular, or UCL, but also other youth schools. And I myself stay tuned and work regularly with the AA Design Research Lab. So I'm having studios every year and exploring new avenues and themes. Currently, we're working a lot on kinetic system and AI empowered creative, spontaneous, responsive environments, for instance, but also working on high density urbanism at the moment, right now with clusters of towers. So I'm keeping. I've been working on teaching as well in other schools, like for instance the GSD, every now and then. But the AA is my home base, and that's incredibly important.
Yes,
and that's not only me teaching there, but Shajay Bhushan, for instance, the head of code, is teaching with me at the DRL, and many others are teaching. So to keep the research is not about so much training up work slaves, but it's about experimenting, with talented people who appreciate what we're trying to do and understand what we're trying to do, to explore new avenues of innovative work, which we can then gradually bring into the mainstream, I mean, into the real world, whether it's urban themes, whether it's some of these work environments with robotic elements, for instance. This usually takes 5-10 years. We've done a lot of tensile and shell structures, which originally at the ERL and then brought it into the firm, for instance, or we've done skeletons and structural expression in towers, which we brought into the real world 10 years on. We bring it from the DRL into the research groups, and then slowly through smaller and ever larger projects into the final professional repertoire of the firm, so that this keeps evolving and is not getting stuck like some of our major competitors are in the risk of getting stuck, or they are stuck. If you look at, what they're doing now is not so much different from what they've done 30 years ago. So that still has a market, but I think in the long run, I think we got to be very adaptive, creative, innovative, and keep churning the research. So that's my recipe.
Yeah, after like Zaha Hadid Architects has involved on many projects on many scales, like from small scale and to larger scales, towers, skyscrapers, and airports, and every kind of scales. So what is the next move towards?
Well, I mean, as I said, the next move is, first of all, there's so many moving certain aspects of interactivity of sensors, actuators, responsive environments, interactive environments, to bring that into the real world, to functionalize this. That still exists only in research and in the art world, and it exists there for 20 years, so it's high time to bring this out. And I think if you look at a lot of buildings, particularly in the corporate world, if you look at Google Campus, they have an insatiable thirst for flexibility. And the environments and their continuous reconfiguration is very complex. So I want to develop architectural agents and systems that are AI empowered, with learning capacity, with spontaneity, where they offer responsive to what's going on. They join a kind of shared life process. So that's one of the projects I foresee.
Yeah.
Now, in terms of that new experience that we more and more go digital, all of our 400 people are working from home right now. Although we still need our office space just like a server farm, or like all the machines with the big software packages and the fast processing capacity connected to the server. That's where the work is taking place, and then staff are at home mirroring those screens and driving these machines. But still, communication is now shifted to Skype on Business, to Zoom, to GoToMeeting. We make client presentations. We have our board meetings. So it's a new experience, and a lot of people have been talking about this. It works better than we thought. Productivity is being maintained. We keep meeting deadlines. So if that's the case, if that experience manifests, and we see this going on for a few more weeks and months, I think the investment in the built environment is one thing, which will to some extent continue, but there will be massive more investment in these kind of systems. And that's also an interesting task for designers. So I'm thinking already about cyberspace, about getting in and designing these virtual communication spaces.
So right? do you think the task of architects for the future, like for finding solutions for pandemics like this,
I think it's not only pandemics. I'm not sure if we will have more of these all the time, but it's also just
to realize should be ready.
Look at the convenience. I mean, life goes on, even though, for instance, Frankfurt Airport is down by 97%. If I look back on the last weeks, and then I sit back and say, hey, maybe it's not so bad that I hadn't had to fly 3 times to China and Russia and Saudi Arabia, etc., and India, like I used to. And maybe we can do more virtually in terms of communication. So that will have an impact if that becomes a general experience. And as I said, I think there will be more investment in these kind of spaces, and maybe slightly less in office spaces. I mean, I shouldn't say that too loudly, because we're building massive office spaces around the world and corporate spaces, but that will be a factor. I mean, it will also be an emphasis on giving more space and complexity to residences, which now have to accommodate various forms of work from home. I mean, it's not going to be universal, but it's going to be on the margin more people, and that's going to have a quantitative effect. And I think we would like to get into these systems. So we are a global design firm. We're doing architecture, urban design, interior design, but also product and furniture design, fashion design, etc. And we haven't done so much graphic design, and particularly communication design in the sense of web tools and web interfaces. And these are colleagues of ours, right? All of these design disciplines are connect up, and they're connected up already in the Bauhaus. And all design is in a way communication design, or all design is communication and framing of interactions and communication. So some of the way this interface is structured here, you on top, me below. I mean, that could be there could be many ways in which this interface could be created. And if you slip into larger surfaces of the built environment, which become virtual windows, and if you're moving from a kind of magazine or graphic design based sensibility and construction of the web into a full 3-dimensional immersive environment version of the web, which was originally the idea when the web came. When the web came up in the mid-90s, I was teaching in Berlin, and we jumped on this, and we created a cyberspace project. It was a so-called virtual college, where the idea was that you can, it's like a video game you enter, and you encounter spaces and places which offer you experiences, information, seminars, lectures, books, movies. So it's a navigation space, it's an interaction space, a bit like, you know, Facebook is playing with this kind of, you become an avatar in this world. I think that idea might take off. Particular if we really have to in the future have these conferences, like recently I've done a lot of Zoom conferences with up to 50, 80, 100 people, and you have the kind of sensibility of a 2D grid with little photos you cannot see and recognize and understand, and it's maybe comes at a certain point illegible and counterintuitive. So I see there a big potential, picking up an idea I was working on literally 25 years ago.
Right. I'll dive into some of your projects, like in large venue projects with multiple functions, such as Heydar Aliyev Center. How did you resolve the spaces away from clutters?
Well, clutter is obviously the kiss of death of elegant and efficient communication spaces. So, but if you have complex institutions with many different parts and places and offerings, the danger of clutter is always there. So that's where parametricism comes in as well, to maintain legibility and clarity in the face of complexity.
So you answered the questions with parametricism in that project?
Of course. The point is that you have that there's a unity across differences, and that you be minimalist in details, but complex in spatial relations with a lot of deep vistas. So you have to get the clutter and details out of the way, suppress clutter, and bring out the essential, still quite complex spatial relationships. So that you find your way, you can navigate, but you also have quite a few things in view simultaneously at each time. So you always have many choices where to move next. You're not kind of going down a corridor. You're not relying on GPS. You can browse a kind of complex environment and you feel empowered. And that has a lot to do with what I call the phenomenological project and the semiological project. And there's a lot to do with this ability. And Heydar Aliyev Center is a good example of that. The way these spaces flow through, and the way there's a coherency between steps of a staircase, the joint lines in a panelization, and the lighting elements which flow around, and they mark the space. They pull you through a space elegantly, and the way you can have a similarity between different spaces, which are at the same time radically different. So the way these white spaces are then flow into a kind of timber and very warm space, but with very similar detail and similar way of treating the light. So you know you're in the same environment, but you also know you're in a very different part of the same institution, and a building which looks very different from each side. A very different silhouette, a very different set of outdoor spaces. There are multiple entrances, but still you know where you are, and the way you organize through an atrium, for instance, or multiple atria. That's a good example, and we have aspired to this in all our projects, and that's actually the key also at the origin of parametricism. When we first developed complex institutions with many parts which intersect, which are layered over, integrating even sometimes an old part, that was the moment of deconstructivism. And if you only have straight lines and boxes, or tilted and angled boxes, and you start intersecting them and you start kind of piling them in, you very, very quickly get into a kind of indecipherable, menacing visual chaos. And then you realize that you can only, but you don't want to let go of the complexity. You don't want to let go of the multiple directions. So then you can kind of integrate it through curvature, through layers, but these layers are now resonating with each other. They're scripted of each other. Then one can guide you to another rather than clashing and creating, let's say, noise. And that's really what we figured out when we were trying to work with this new level of complexity, and we wanted to not get lost in our own drawing. The problem with deconstructing is you work on a big drawing, and you go take a coffee, you go back and you don't find anymore where you were walking, what you were doing, where is that space? You can't even find yourself in your own drawing. You know already you're on there's something is going deeply wrong. If you don't find your way in your own drawing, nobody will find ever their way in your building. So parametricism was, then we moved into the curvature, into these rules, into gradients, etc., where you can handle this complexity and we basically discovered parametricism and the superiority of parametricism. And it was also clear we were winning these competitions against these deconstructivists and the minimalists.
Impressive.
Because the minimalists was making everything sterile and monotonous, and it was easy it seemed easy, but you couldn't find anything because everything was kind of bleached over by a neutral grid. The deconstructivists had the complexity, but they generate visual chaos, and we come in having both complexity and legibility, and we're winning every single competition.
Everything in competition.
And
right.
we were the ones, we moved from 4 people to 40 people to 400 people. What's coming next?
Great. Love it. Who or what would you say was your source of inspiration for sparking ideas for projects like taxiing Beijing Airport?
Well, you know, it's not something you wake up and see. This is a process. So for instance,
but the poems are actually like inspired from nature or any kind of.
Of course, but this is a long process. I mean, there's Frei Otto in there. There is something we picked up. There is something we explored. For instance, in the Serpentine Sackler Gallery in London. For instance, that idea of a column, which is at the same time a light well. There are many ideas. The idea of kind of striated elements. The idea of big shells. And the way they're composed, so this is not something which, I mean, this is a synthesis of 15 years of research,
experience,
academic exploration, smaller projects. There's a bit of there's about kind of 5 aquatic centers in there as well. So and then to kind of build it up and synthesize and I mean, of course, it's wonderful to see it in the end. Wonderfully powerful, so generous, and at a scale which we've never seen. It's very rewarding. Right. It's very rewarding, but it's not something you have an inspiration and you put it down on a napkin. It's something which we could do after a series of steps and stages of developing the capacity and the vision and the ideas.
Right. So as one of the pioneers in architecture, how do you think AI will evolve with architecture? And could you talk to us about the impact of AI in architecture and what will be its role?
Well, I mean, it will be a fantastic tool for everybody in all professions, in all domains of life. And we are, I mean, the definition of AI is not 100% settled, but I mean, to the extent that we're using evolutionary algorithms, for instance, there is an element there, genetic algorithms to solve problems. That is an artificial intelligence that's also creative, so it's generative and selective evaluative, all in one. I would bring this in under artificial intelligence in the domain of design in particular. But I also think that we would find the built environment itself acquiring intelligence. And that's what I was hinted at earlier. So if we embed many sensors, if we want to have real-time feedback of what goes on in buildings and let the building begin to respond to that, this will be initially simple, but there will also be more and more sophisticated robotic systems. And they have to be non-mechanical. They don't have to be you going around with a control joystick trying to instruct the various systems what they should do. That is, will fail. And you can also not have one central planner sitting there and trying to arrange how the space needs to be redissected the next morning. He doesn't know. So what we need is decentralized agent systems. We're exploring at the moment in our research group of multiple architectural agents, human agents that should be interacting, and the buildings and the architectural agents need to acquire utility functions. They need to acquire creative ranges of exploration. They need to be reinforcement learning, so machine learning principles which will, in a sense, train up their behavior and make sure that they're always fully utilized, that they offer and propose things which are accepted and helpful. And that's the way I see it. If you have a big firm with many kind of staff members, you also don't want to tell them what to do. You want them to be self-directed. You want them to fit in and make themselves useful according to their capacities, their position, their which networks they're part of, and that's what you want of the building, of course, a spontaneous, creative, self-directed contribution to the success of the overall organization, of the institution,
100%.
whether it's a museum, whether it's a library, where the books continue to reshuffle so that they are in a competitive race to be picked up by the right people. They should understand who's coming in and out. And the same is with the chairs. The chairs in the spaces in your firm should be responsible for being fully utilized. So that you have to be intelligent, sensitive, and creative creatures. That's what we want with all our tools. We want them to be intelligent, the kind of Siri assistants of this world. And you don't want to tell them what to do. That you want them to tell, to make themselves useful. So that's AI everywhere. And we can, of course, we as architects, we have to start thinking about this. We have to simulate that. We have to build these models, and we can. We're working a lot with Unity, for instance, or Unreal and such game engines where there could be a powerful and is going on for us technology transfer from the kind of gaming industry into the architectural vision industry.
As a Zaha Hadid architect, do you also design for game industry as well?
We should. We've done some sets for film, for sci-fi films, etc., which were never filmed. But
may I ask which one?
Were never filmed, so they're in the market.
Okay.
So, yeah, we did some cityscapes and cities. So a lot of, I mean, our buildings are always used for movie sets. Whether it's in India or the Wolfsburg Science Center, and I mean, there's been many explorations where they stimulate the kind of vision of the future. But I think that we are, again, we're working at the moment at the AA and in our research group. We're working up capacities which will bring into the real world some of the things we both at the moment are dreaming of. We can simulate them at the moment, and we're building capacity. What we need is investment, the commitment, and we need to also, and that's the difficulty here, we can't just be kind of playful and illustrative with this. That could work maybe for an art context, but for a hard-nosed business context, we need to also have build the science, the evidence-based, let's say, simulations to show how cost is matched with benefit. But we're doing that, so I'm quite confident that this will come.
Impressive. What kind of books you read? Is there any books like you could suggest?
Well, I mean, of course, I recommend my own books and articles. You can go to my website to see what my latest ideas are. I just came out with something called From Intuition to Simulation. I'm also been writing about the recent student research and what the meaning of that is, so that's always interesting. In terms of other books, I mean, at the moment, I'm very much also engaged in economics, politics, libertarian politics, and I'm actually working on a new book called Markets and Discourses. So looking at markets and discourses, looking at the future of a society where we have more degrees of freedom, because I believe as architects it seems pretty evident that the current bureaucracy is preventing a lot of innovative ideas to come through in terms of urbanism, in terms of building typologies, in terms of mixed use, in terms of ways of living together, for instance, like co-living, co-working. There's an enormous amount of restrictions and prejudice. So I feel we need to break through this. So I'm dreaming about a society where we have more individual freedom, more individual responsibility, entrepreneurial freedom, and we would be all better off. I'm very convinced of this. We just need to, we can't presume that we get a massive, let's say, productivity boost. For instance, this AI revolution is not going to happen if we want 100 guarantees before we make the first step. If we put handcuffs on every entrepreneur before he gets started.
Exactly.
put so that's why this technological revolution isn't happening. I mean, it should have been happening. And even if there are some productivity gains somewhere else they have frittered away. So if you think about it, in Europe we have zero productivity gains. So we are standing still. It's paralysis. So that's why I'm kind of a little bit edgy, and I want, and you know, and somehow I've been recently looking at. I mean, we're mostly heading into a big major economic crisis, where a lot of rethinking is happening, and the Corona thing is also accelerating that. So I'm reading stuff. I don't even know what to recommend this. It's kind of predictions of the mega crash and the societal kind of controversies and resetting requirements and resetting opportunities, which are around the corner. So that's interesting stuff. Like the mega crash and what will happen.
Next.
But I think there is something to it. Even if it's not a mega crash, I think we're in interesting times where a lot of things will be reset, and I hope it's going to be it will be a reset which gives more freedom, entrepreneurship, more space to that, so that we can grow ourselves out of this hole.
Right.
And not hold up. The alternative is holding hands in the hole and digging and sinking deeper. It's nice to have the feeling that we're all holding hands, but if we all sink down, I'm not sure. So rather we have a competitive race to go up and fly, rather than holding hands, sinking into the hole and deeper into the hole. So
you said you're writing a book, right?
I'm writing a book. I mean, I'm also.
Do you have any release date?
No, I'm giving myself a bit more time on this. I'm also conceptualizing volume 3 of the Auto Process of Architecture. The first was a new framework for architecture. The second was a new agenda for architecture, and volume 3 will be a new practice for architecture. So more practically oriented, really cashing out in terms of new practices, new interventions in the built environment. So I'm working on that, as well as on that more, let's say, political book, which is very much focused on how we can throw away the crutches, the handcuffs, and let that technology promise come through. Because I don't want to see some of this. I don't want to look back in another 20 years and say we still haven't gotten there. We're still going on in circles. So that's what I'm working on and hoping for.
Great. So as our final question, what kind of advice would you like to share with young professionals and students, maybe?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, read my books.
Such a controversial question.
Those who have the capacity and those who have the intellect, they should read some of my articles and then dig deeper into the book, because I think it's important that we have intellectual leadership, that we have aspirations where there's not only the intuitive fascination with these beautiful constructs and complex spaces, and that we love them, but also we understand how they help society to flourish, how they help to make us more productive, how they help to also be highly, let's say, environmentally kind of light in their footprint and in their so that's one thing. Read up, but also skill up. Invest in the skills now. As a student, that you will never have the chance later on. Once you get stuck, you're stuck with the skills you have. You gain some experience and maturity. You gain managerial capacity. But as a designer, if you don't acquire the skills now, if you don't acquire the virtuosity, you will be you'll be stuck with what you bring at that point. And therefore, and that will also means what kind of level you can enter, which firms you will be joining, which teams you can enter into, and they're not all the same level. They're not all with the same kind of energy and ambition. So that's the time. You got to get your skills up, and that means working on them. But you also do your readings. I mean, and understand why you're skilling up. I think both of us very much appreciate it. Yeah.
Great.
Watch these videos. I mean, I think I'm
YouTube.
I'm more and more learning through YouTube myself,
Right.
and through podcasts and audiobooks on the run, rather than books themselves. I mean, I have a massive library, but I don't know. That might remain kind of boxed up somewhere.
Exactly. Thank you. Thank you
Okay, it's my
so much.
pleasure.
It's a pleasure to talk to you, Mr. Patrik.
It was a pleasure, and sorry again, I was kind of getting so frustrated with my
Okay.
first Instagram live thing. But yeah,
It's okay. Thank you.
see you guys.
Appreciate that. See
Bye,
you.
bye, bye, bye.
Goodbye.
My pleasure. Bye now.